They never understood what they were looking at, until it was too late. What once looked like hesitation was actually calibration. While they mocked what they couldn't interpret, something ancient in you was calculating each delay, each silence, each deviation from their predictable path. You were never late. You were aligning. And now, without warning, you've surpassed them not with noise, but with velocity. The same mouths that once whispered your irrelevance now stay open in disbelief, unable to explain how the one they forgot to count ended up breaking the entire scoreboard. There are people lying awake tonight in dimly lit rooms, doom-scrolling through the highlight reel of your evolution. Their envy has mutated into obsession. Not because you're thriving, but because your rise proves they were never the authority on what mattered. These are the same faces that found unity in doubting you, that found comfort in your missteps, that built their self-worth on the assumption you'd never rise. And now, their world is glitching. Every update about your progress is a notification they wish they could mute. The pain they feel isn't just regret, it's the haunting realization that they misread a divine equation. They didn't just bet against a person, they miscalculated the odds of a sacred timeline. What they called delusion was actually encrypted vision. And now the weight of that misjudgment is cracking their composure. They didn't just ignore potential, they interfered with sacred architecture. And the price for that interference is beginning to collect, one consequence at a time. What's happening now is irreversible. You've become the moment they can't stop reliving. You are the glitch in their logic, the error in their timeline, the proof that unseen forces really do favor the bold. You didn't just rise, you redefined the altitude. And the most haunting part for them? You did it without looking back. Not everyone was meant to walk beside brilliance during its construction phase. There are seasons when silence becomes the only voice allowed to shape the foundation, and that silence is no accident. The absences that once felt like betrayal were actually pre-approved exits, guided by something far beyond human logic. What looked like desertion was actually divine choreography. The shedding of old alliances wasn't emotional fallout, it was cosmic design. Notice how all the doors closed at once, as if some unseen switch had been flipped. Conversations dried up, familiar faces vanished, and even the most dependable connections evaporated without warning. That's not coincidence, that's clearance. The blueprint for your emergence required solitude so pure that even well-meaning souls had to be redirected. It wasn't rejection, it was containment. Because what was incubating inside of you couldn't afford contamination from lesser frequencies. And during that eerie stillness, when the world turned its back and your reflection was your only companion, something rare was being installed beneath the surface. You weren't breaking, you were reconfiguring. Internal systems were rerouted. Perception was being recalibrated. The ability to decode unseen truths, sense hidden currents, and read vibrations like language was being etched into your awareness. The void wasn't empty. It was sacred. What others interpreted as stagnation was actually the calibration of a vessel preparing to hold truths too vast for the ordinary. While they assumed nothing was happening, everything was changing. Not in public view, but in the silence where only destiny had clearance to enter. They misread your silence as surrender, not realizing it was the sound of something ancient unlocking inside you. While they passed the time inventing stories about your downfall, you were submerged in realms they couldn't perceive, pulling ideas out of invisible places, building strategies from raw intuition. What looked like failure on the surface was actually data being gathered in a sacred laboratory. No blueprint existed for what you were becoming, so you had to carve it into existence. Alone, misunderstood, and often on the brink of emotional collapse. The confusion that clouded your mind wasn't madness, it was recalibration. The questions that kept you awake at night weren't weakness, They were contractions signaling the arrival of an unshakable identity. And while others smirked at your struggle, you were enduring a kind of inner earthquake that clears the debris before the new foundation is poured. They didn't just doubt your vision, they tried to drain your access. They pulled strings behind the scenes, rerouted support, and disguised their sabotage as indifference. Some crossed lines you didn't even know existed. Resources vanished. Trusted figures turned opportunistic. Payments delayed, promises broken, hands withdrawn just as you reached out. They didn't just want you to fail, they wanted to watch you bend under the pressure of hunger, of rent, of survival. But what they didn't see was that every withheld dollar, every stolen moment, every false gesture, was creating a pressure chamber for divine recompense to build velocity. Now, strange disruptions are appearing in their world. Not from you, but from the laws they thought they could cheat. Systems are rejecting them. Digital trails are resurfacing. Transactions they thought were buried are crawling back into daylight. Their names are being flagged, their accounts suspended, their masks slipping. The trap they set for your exhaustion became a ledger for their exposure. And the balance. It's not just tipping. It's collapsing, and it's too late to reroute the consequence. Not every threat comes with a warning label. Sometimes the most dangerous interference wears the face of friendship, blends into casual conversations, and moves in shadows just beyond your line of sight. What felt like minor friction was actually an invisible lattice of resistance. Quiet meetings were held. Information was passed like coded messages. A network formed, not out of open hatred, but from the slow drip of concealed envy masquerading as concern. There were people who held your hand while dialing numbers to block your access. Some carried your name into rooms, not to recommend, but to restrain. They cloaked their sabotage in politeness, dressed it up in fake praise, and offered half-smiles while laying down roadblocks. A few bore the same last name. Others once shared your victories. But all of them found subtle ways to chip away at your reputation without ever lifting a weapon. Each delayed email, each opportunity that vanished before it reached your desk, each collaboration that crumbled without explanation, it was all part of a deeper pattern. And every invisible blow sharpened something internal. A new level of perception began to grow. You started sensing interference before it arrived. Plans were revealed in whispers. You learned to trust the stillness more than the applause. What they meant for confusion became your training in pattern recognition beyond the natural eye. And as their influence decayed, your vision accelerated. Without realizing it, you were developing a spiritual sonar, capable of picking up lies camouflaged as compliments. Premonitions became accurate. Encounters began delivering encoded messages. The atmosphere around people told more truth than their words. You weren't just adapting. You were mutating into a version of yourself that couldn't be infiltrated again. They thought their tactics would shrink you, but instead, you became fluent in the language of divine intelligence. And fluent people are hard to mislead. They assumed your silence meant surrender, unaware that blueprints for an entirely different reality were being etched into your mind. The vision they dismissed as far-fetched, the ideas they labeled foolish, are now evolving into systems that defy their understanding of value. That offbeat skill set they laughed at is becoming the very thing that shifts generational narratives. While they were trying to bury your potential under doubt, you were being commissioned to craft an ecosystem that would outlive their opinions. What once seemed niche or too different has suddenly become necessary. The offerings that sat unnoticed for years are now creating a demand wave so strong. People are waiting in line just to experience what you naturally carry. Calls are coming in. Partnerships are aligning. And what felt like fantasy is now logistical planning. But none of this is random. This elevation arrives only after discipline was proven in dry seasons. The doors you're walking through didn't swing open. They were carved open through your refusal to compromise when shortcuts were easier. Recognition isn't just coming in the form of accolades or checks. It's happening in the faces of those whose lives are changing because you chose to stay aligned. People are quoting you, messaging you, referring you like you're a secret they want to share but also want to keep for themselves. The work you once performed in obscurity is becoming a reference point. You're no longer hustling to be seen, you're selecting what's worth your time, because not every spotlight is safe. And as your expansion accelerates, an inverse decline begins for those who tried to fracture your path. Their interference is echoing through their bodies now, not because of curses, but because of misalignment. The imbalance they created in your world has reversed and is now unraveling theirs. There are tremors showing up in their routines, not just setbacks, but consequences they can't medicate or deny. Their systems are buckling under the weight of the roles they chose to play. And while you ascend in strength, they are learning that energy never disappears. It simply returns home with interest. They ridiculed what they didn't understand, labeling your inner clarity as confusion simply because it didn't fit inside their framework of control. Whenever your insight shattered logic, they'd reach for clinical terms to box it in. When your instincts defied probability, they whispered doubts disguised as concern. And now, with their own grip on reality unraveling, they're forced to sit in the discomfort they once projected onto you. Except this time, there's no language left to cover the cracks forming within their own minds. They're confronting something far more terrifying than being wrong. They're realizing that what they mocked was never madness, but a signal they were too numb to hear. The internal compass they once trusted has collapsed into static. Their judgment is scattered. What they once called grounded now feels hollow. Physical symptoms are surfacing with no clear origin. It's not that they're being punished. It's that their bodies are echoing back the spiritual distortion they've cultivated for years. The breakdown isn't random. It's exact. For every time they tried to interrupt your direction, their own steps are now misfiring. For every moment they blocked clarity from reaching you, they now walk blindfolded through decisions they can't reverse. Fatigue that doesn't go away. Illnesses that shift but never heal. Financial drains appearing from nowhere. It's not retribution. It's reflection. The energy they scattered into the world has returned, but this time it's tangled and heavier than when it left. The exposure begins quietly. Whispers from those who once stood by their side now carry hints of guilt. People are backing away, not because they've changed hearts, but because they see how close the consequences have come. Documents appear. Secrets leak. The architecture of their campaign starts crumbling from within. And while this unraveling plays out, the truth of who you are, once laughed at, once denied, becomes undeniable. Not because you shouted louder, but because time always sides with what was real. There's a moment when scattered confusion sharpens into undeniable clarity, when fragments of the past click into place and the scale of what's been done against you becomes impossible to ignore. Hidden correspondence emerges like fossils under sand, showing timelines and tactics far more deliberate than you ever imagined. Entire clusters of messages detail how doubt was seated in rooms you never entered. Behind-the-scenes coordination once dismissed as coincidence reveals itself as a long-term strategy masquerading as everyday life. Some disclosures come from the most unlikely voices, individuals who once stood on the front lines of the opposition but have since cracked under their own conscience. Others confess out of fear, their hands shaking as they speak about the roles they played under pressure. What becomes clear is this: the orchestration didn't begin when you became successful. It started long before your voice was public, before your talents had even touched the surface. They were watching for signs, waiting for confirmation that what they feared was true, that you were built to append everything they were trying to preserve. There are records of early warnings, meetings held under the guise of concern, files, comments, strategic silence. Not because you had done anything wrong, but because your mere presence carried the blueprint for something that couldn't be controlled. Systems began adapting before you even stepped into purpose. And the deeper you dig, the more it's confirmed. No one builds barriers for someone they think is irrelevant. What's unfolding now isn't just exposure, it's vindication. The magnitude of resistance is the mirror of your importance. The deeper the sabotage, the greater the perceived threat. And the financial uprising set in motion is no accident. Streams of abundance are appearing not just as reward, but as disruption. They're disrupting every narrative crafted to contain you. The abundance isn't just wealth, it's proof. And every digit added to your growth is erasing the lie that they were ever in control. There's a moment when the numbers stop making sense, not because they're wrong, but because they've outgrown the logic they once followed. This is no longer about slow progression or climbing financial ladders step by step. What's emerging now is exponential. An accelerated elevation where figures multiply in patterns that analysts can't model and economists can't forecast. The resources arriving are not rewards for labor alone. They are signatures of a deeper covenant, proof that you've been authorized to operate on a level untouched by market volatility or public opinion. The pathways opening before you were never accidents. Streams of provision are converging with architectural precision, each one designed to override instability and counteract sabotage. This isn't just prosperity, it's encrypted security. Systems have been built in silence to ensure your forward motion continues regardless of external interference. That breakthrough in your financial reality isn't just about luxury or lifestyle. It marks a dimensional shift in your identity, a graduation into influence, stewardship, and spiritual infrastructure few are permitted to carry. New alignments are forming without manual effort. Offers that match your natural rhythm are surfacing without force. Opportunities you once had to chase are now requesting you by name. Ventures that had gone dormant are being reactivated, not as burdens, but as automated blessings. People are no longer hiring you for what you do. They're seeking you out because of what moves through you. They're exchanging currency for clarity, paying not just for results, but for transformation they can't find anywhere else. Properties are changing hands. Spaces you once dreamed of are becoming options on your desk. Access is shifting. Locations once sealed behind gatekeepers are now being opened through quiet recommendations and unforeseen relationships. It's not luck, it's sequence. Everything is arriving according to a design that has long been in motion, waiting only for your internal readiness to meet its external manifestation. This isn't just expansion, it's a new system entirely, one not built on man's prediction, but divine release. They swore by spreadsheets and formulas while you were following a compass they couldn't decode. But now, the metrics are bending. Growth patterns are emerging that don't align with standard forecasting. Revenue is multiplying in ways even experts can't reverse engineer, not because you outwork them, but because your alignment created a current they never factored in. Ventures you launched on instinct alone are outperforming blueprints backed by entire teams. And the most startling part? It's not random, it's repeatable, because it's not coming from the market, it's coming from your internal calibration to timing they can't access. This surge isn't driven by craving, it's born of clarity. The irony is that real wealth began flowing when you stopped chasing it. The moment you stopped needing money to feel secure, it started pursuing you with unwavering consistency. Not as a reward for suffering, but as recognition of your evolution. You no longer define yourself by possessions, which is exactly why possessions are now magnetized toward your energy. You stopped trying to impress and became impossible to ignore. Onlookers who once rolled their eyes at your beliefs are now glued to your progress like it's a breaking news story. They're watching balances shift, properties transfer, and influence grow, but they still can't find the source code behind it. The speed of your rise has left them disoriented, not just because it's fast, but because it violates every rule they trusted. Their envy is rooted in confusion. How did someone they dismissed manage to leapfrog everything they built on manipulation? And now, the reversal begins. The very platforms they created through falsehoods are redirecting attention toward your authenticity. The audiences they gathered through exaggeration are now craving something real, and you've already become the answer. Every dollar they spent on illusion has primed the world to desire substance, and now you're supplying what they can't. Their empire wasn't just temporary, it was promotional. And unknowingly, they've become the marketing team for your rise. They poured their energy into constructing illusions, believing appearances would shield them from truth's arrival. They bought symbols of status with borrowed time, dressed their insecurity in expensive distractions, and sold their authenticity for borrowed praise. But now the mirage is thinning. Their props are breaking under the weight of reality, right as your foundation begins to shine. Their version of success was always synthetic, propped up by pretense and maintained by secrecy. What they tried to simulate with shortcuts, you built with sweat. And now the difference is undeniable. While their image crumbles from the inside out, your legacy is expanding from the inside in. Assets they leveraged for likes are being seized. Items they flaunted to provoke envy now sit in storage, unpaid and unwanted. Their circles are shrinking. Their phones are quieter. Meanwhile, your slow, sacred momentum is compounding. The seeds you planted without applause are sprouting into results that can't be faked. Your connections are deepening, your reach is widening, and your steps are supported by something they never dared build: integrity. Their panic isn't just about losing material things. It's about realizing that none of it was ever real. And worse, that their obsession with outpacing you led them into traps of their own making. Hidden records are surfacing. Conversations they thought buried are being revived in inboxes and archives. Loose alliances are fracturing under the pressure of exposure. What once looked like unity is collapsing into finger-pointing and frantic disassociation. Their attempts to bury you are now being unearthed as evidence, and it's all turning on them. Health is declining, not just from age or stress, but from spiritual corrosion. You can't consume lies daily and expect the body not to react. They're misplacing details, forgetting who they've deceived, caught between layers of contradictory stories. Socially, their influence is fading. Those who once joined the scheme are stepping away in silence, fearing they'll be dragged down by association. The very manipulation they used to isolate you is now isolating them. Their fortress was built from paper, and it's burning from the inside out. Each step they took against you now moves them further from stability. Every closed door they tried to lock behind you is now sealing them in. Their failure wasn't just in underestimating your strength, it was in believing lies could outlast truth. But the reckoning is no longer abstract. It's unfolding, not all at once, but in waves. And with each one, they're forced to watch you rise from the soil they once tried to poison. Their downfall isn't revenge. It's rebalancing. And no amount of performance can save them from the echo of what they've set in motion.